أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن عليًا ولي الله أشهد أن عليًا ولي الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين فاطر السماوات والأرضين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Today, on this Jum'ah Friday, we bid farewell to a Gregorian year. It is the end of 2021. Some of us know of that as the Christian year, some of us know of it as the Gregorian year or a secular year, but it is the end of one measure of time, and tomorrow will be the beginning of another measure of time. And so the first point that I would like to briefly discuss is, do we have one Islamic year that then will tell us this year is not an Islamic year? Or we should not give any recognition or any importance to the beginning or the end of a secular or a Christian measure of time? And the answer to that is that we do have an Islamic year, but that Islamic calendar and that Islamic year is for specific purposes. It was a calendar designed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to facilitate the religious and the spiritual life and growth of the Muslims. And because this community is one that is based on the involvement of every individual member, the Islamic calendar was designed to be a calendar that doesn't require any kind of strong government authority or agency to calculate and determine and change what the days are like. Most other calendars, it is only through a government power that they are enforced, or through some kind of central authority. Because if you want to keep your calendar aligned to the seasons, then that requires observatories. It requires calculations. And then even the most accurate calendars that we have had in history, they have discovered that, there is a small difference, but even a difference of a few seconds in 1 year adds up over 10 years or 100 years or 1,000 years, and the calendar needs to be corrected. I'll just give you one example. Right now, all of us are used to the Gregorian calendar. But before the Gregorian calendar, there was a calendar known as the Julian calendar. And some of you may have heard that in some churches, Christmas is not celebrated until January. In Russia and in other Orthodox churches, they aren't celebrating Christmas on the 25th of December, they celebrate Christmas in early January. The reason is they still follow the Julian calendar. And somewhere in the 16th century, the Catholic Pope decided that the calendar which they were following at that time, the Julian calendar, is no longer in line with the seasons. Spring is not coming at the right appointed time. And so a commission was appointed, the greatest astronomers of the world. They recalculated and came up with a proposal for a reform of the Gregorian calendar. Approximately every 400 years, they took away 3 leap years. And then Pope Gregorius said that we are going to drop a few days from the year. And there were protests. And there were people who died, saying that the Pope is robbing us of 10 years of our life. Now, this was because people didn't understand the nature of the change. It's just a decree on a piece of paper. It doesn't shorten your life or lengthen your life. But there were other reasons why there was controversy. Because if somebody adopted the new calendar, then in one sense it meant that you are accepting the authority of the Pope. And many people considered the Pope to be corrupt. And so some countries adopted the Gregorian calendar early, and then some countries, they didn't adopt that calendar for hundreds of years. In Europe, some countries adopted it in the 16th century, some in the 17th century, some in the 18th century. They continued to use the old Julian calendar. Then, when European imperialism and power spread throughout the world, for business, for most purposes, now everybody uses the Gregorian calendar that you and I are familiar with. But even now, many Christians, Orthodox Christians, they say the calendar that we were following throughout the centuries, for 1,500 years before the Catholic Church changed the calendar, this was the Julian calendar, and that was based on the calendar of Imperial Rome. And they continue to use that even now to celebrate Easter, to celebrate Christmas, and that is why their days are different. This is just one example. But if you look, there are similar reforms and changes that took place in the Jewish calendar, and it enshrines the power of a political authority. But in Islam, any one of us can go outside and look for the crescent, and then even if I don't believe that you saw the moon, I think you saw a cloud and you were confused. But you don't need me, whether I'm just a fellow believer in your own city, or an alim, or a mujtahid, to tell you that your sighting is correct or incorrect. And if you make a mistake, or I make a mistake, then next month it can be corrected. None of those mistakes are going to compound year after year and decade after decade. So what does this calendar of Islam do? It gives a responsibility and it gives agency to every individual. Now, to know how to determine the next month, you need knowledge. And if you don't have knowledge, then you need to refer to a scholar. But again, you choose whose opinion, whose fatwa, whose logic you wish to follow. So this is by design in Islam, because Islam wants every member of the ummah to feel equally a part of this religion and equally a responsibility towards this religion. So if your political leaders are corrupt, if your, God forbid, if your religious leaders are corrupt, if any other institution or other individual believer is corrupt, then you can be one of those people who brings change into society and revives and reforms people's religious life. This is why we have Jama'at, congregation. This is why we get together for Eid. This is why we get together for every Friday prayer. This is why we get together for Hajj. This is why we have the institution of Hajj and Ziyarat. And this is why we have our Islamic calendar. One of the other benefits of the Islamic calendar is that it reminds us that there is no season to be happy and there is no season to be sad. But our happiness, our sadness, it is to be tied to our religious principles and observance. You know how people, they have a certain association with certain times of year. If you grow up in a place where wintertime there is snow, you might have a very pleasant nostalgia and association of a white Christmas. And then if you move somewhere else for a little while, it's kind of destabilizing that this is a warmer climate, now Christmas is not cold and it's not white, it's very different. Some people, they have less pleasant associations with the holiday season because of their personal experiences or their own life story, but whether positive or negative, most people, they have a nostalgia and association that this is the season for celebration. This is a season for gift giving. This is associated with one or another thing in my culture and in my personal life. But for a Muslim, you have celebrations, you have times of serious and solemn worship, you have times of mourning. But you don't associate that with one season. Nobody says Eid al-Fitr is when snow is on the ground. Because one year it'll be in the winter, and then a few years later it will be in the fall. And then 10 or 15 years later it will be in the summer. Breaking those associations, breaking a force of habit and reminding us that Eid al-Fitr is associated with worship and with sacrifice. The observance of Muharram with its grief, the days of ibadah and the nights of ibadah, and the days of celebration. All of these, they are not associated with a particular time of year or weather or a fixed season, but they are associated with events. And those events also pertain to how they relate to our spiritual life, not to how they relate to our external environment. That is a very powerful and a very important message for every human being, that you don't celebrate what is on the outside. You don't commemorate what is on the outside. You don't grieve what is on the outside, but rather you internalize that message, and your commemoration, your celebration, your grief is about your soul and the life of your soul. The job of Islam, the task of Islam, is to take all of us who live in this physical world. We eat, we drink, we sleep, we get sick, we get better. And to take us from living in this world to not think only about this world, but rather to think about the eternal world, where it is not our physical body, but rather our soul that is of greatest importance. And the Islamic calendar is designed to help us in that regard, by removing us from the association with weather and season and external kinds of situations, by changing every year a little bit. That right now, for example, Shahr Ramadan will come in the late spring. Next year it'll be in the middle or the beginning of spring. Then it'll be a little colder and the days will be shorter. And gradually that will change. And it'll remind you that it is not the season, not the length of the day, not the environment that defines that worship, but rather the spirit of sacrifice and the spirit of dedication to Allah throughout our life. So these are two of the purposes of the Islamic calendar. To give every individual believer agency, you decide. Doesn't mean you decide on your own. You should refer to scholarship, but nobody imposes a centrally calculated calendar upon you, which has been used and abused throughout history until the present day. And also it reminds you that the life of a believer is defined by the life of the soul, not the life of the body. Now this brings us to the earlier question. Does that mean that every other calendar is un-Islamic? No. The Islamic calendar is designed for these religious purposes, some of which I mentioned for you, and many more could be described if we had more time. The Islamic calendar is designed to make me a better believer and a better Muslim, to remember Allah, and to remember that my true life is the life of the soul. The Islamic calendar is not designed to manage your budget or your finances. The Islamic calendar is not designed to tell you when to plant or when to harvest. The Islamic calendar is not designed to tell you when the school year should start or when the school year should end. The Islamic calendar is not designed to run all of the affairs of your life. It is designed for a specific purpose, and in Allah's wisdom, He gave us that calendar to facilitate our religious life, to facilitate our connection to nature through Allah, to facilitate the purposes that He knows best. This is why Islamic society and Islamic civilization has always had additional calendars for other purposes when it comes just to the life of our society, our farming, our business, our organization and planning. Those calendars were defined by other secular societies, but that doesn't make them un-Islamic or less Islamic. They are for another purpose. Many years before the Gregorian calendar was reformed and became precise, There was an Islamic solar calendar. Today you can research about it, known as the Jalali calendar, which is currently used in many parts of the Persian-speaking world, including in Iran. And this calendar, designed by Islamic astronomers, was the most accurate solar calendar of its time. And it was used in government and agriculture by Muslim societies because it allowed for planning of agriculture, taxation, and so many other affairs. It's in use until today. It's not Islamic or un-Islamic to do so. Coptic, Roman, and other calendars have also been used by Muslims in different parts of the world. The point is that it is not un-Islamic to use a different calendar for its purpose, but it should never substitute for the Islamic calendar in our religious life. So, is it relevant for us to mark the end of one year, the beginning of a Gregorian year? If it facilitates our planning and our decision making, then it is relevant. Especially in this society, when all of society, they are governed by this calendar, your taxes, your budgeting, many other affairs. Maybe your income is tied to this calendar, then it doesn't make sense to ignore it. It would be just as foolish as if I were to tell a high school student or a college student, forget about the academic calendar, it's not Islamic. September and May are exactly the same. September is when you need to prepare to start your school year. May is when you need to be ready for your final exams. How foolish would it look if I said this is an un-Islamic calendar, ignore it? Similarly, if you live in this society, you're not in school, but you are a member of this society. Take stock of your affairs, your worldly affairs, in the end of the year. Make a plan for your worldly affairs in the beginning of the year, to the extent that it helps you better manage, better take care of your worldly affairs. And just like a student is justified in celebrating the end of an academic year, there is no harm Islamically if you celebrate a good harvest if you are a farmer, or you celebrate or you mark the beginning or the end of a secular year. But remember that our religious life is defined by our Islamic calendar. And so as a Muslim, I shouldn't say, well, it's New Year, I'm going to celebrate, regardless of whether it is a day of mourning or a day of happiness. I shouldn't say that this takes priority. The first priority is for us to align our practice with our Islamic conception of time, with our Islamic calendar. And if there is no day of grief or mourning, then there is no harm in remembering or commemorating the solar year with any of those solar calendars that exist. The last thing that I would like to say is that the problem that we have is not the existence of other calendars alongside the solar calendar. For some Muslims, it's a big deal. They say that because we are Muslim, we oppose New Year. Because we are Muslim, we oppose Thanksgiving. Because we are Muslim, we oppose Mother's Day and Father's Day or any of these other days or commemorations that are part of a secular year. The existence of those marks of time is not a problem for us. The problem is that we are disconnected from our calendar and our own marking of time. If I don't know when is Friday, and I don't know that there should be a special attention to worship on Friday, it doesn't matter whether I celebrate New Year or I don't celebrate New Year, my Islam is going to be weakened. If I don't know when is the date of wilada of one of the members of Ahlul Bayt, and I don't celebrate that day, if I don't know when is the day of mourning for a member of Ahlul Bayt, and I don't grieve over their loss, I don't feel an obligation to attend a majlis or a gathering remembering Ahlul Bayt, if that day is like any other day for me, it doesn't matter whether I do or I don't commemorate a date on another calendar, my Islam is going to be weakened. So the most important message is for us to be in touch with our Islamic calendar, with our Islamic commemorations, with the happiness and the sadness of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. And then we can certainly wish our neighbors a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year. We can even mark those passages of time in our own lives as long as it is subordinate to, and it is not a substitute for, our Islamic practice and our Islamic remembrance. It is a marking of time. It might help us in our planning, in our budgeting, in our worldly affairs, but our religious affairs and the life of our soul are governed by the calendar, the observances, the commemorations, the occasions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to us, and that Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam through their lives represented. As we find in hadith, the Shia of Ahlul Bayt, the true Muslims, are those يَفْرَحُونَ لِفَرَحِنَا وَيَحْزَنُونَ لِحُزْنِنَا. We celebrate with Ahlul Bayt and we grieve with Ahlul Bayt. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Abil Qasim Muhammad wa ala Ali Amir al-Mu'minin wa ala Fatimah al-Zahra Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen wa ala al-Hasan wal-Husayn Sayyiday Shabab Ahli al-Jannah wa Ali ibn al-Husayn ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله مخرجه وظهوره وجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه. صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد. I seek forgiveness from Allah for myself and all of us present and all mu'mineen and mu'minat throughout the world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and always keep us on the straight path of iman and taqwa, of faith and piety. Very briefly in the second khutbah, there is an unspoken ideal that many people in this society have, and even Muslims sometimes adopt, maybe without realizing it, which is that we wish to have a life of comfort and ease. And if we have to work, then our ideal is that I want to work until I have enough to be able to relax. So we look forward to retirement. We look forward to having enough money that we don't need to work a day again in our life. We may envy those people who are able to live in that way. And partially that is human fitrah, and that is not wrong. But it is misplaced if I have an unspoken or a spoken desire to have a period of rest and relaxation and no work in this life. There is a hadith of our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu was-salam, in which it is reported, he said, "i'malu qalilan tana'amu kathira." Work for a little bit, and then you will have ni'mah, and you will be blessed, and you will live a life of comfort for a long time, meaning eternity. So the fact that people want it, that we want it, is not wrong. But the fact that we want it in this world is what is wrong. Our sixth Imam says, work for a little bit, and then you will be able to profit and you will be able to enjoy it kathira, abundantly. But that is meant to be for the hereafter. If you are able to retire, then a Muslim should say, as long as I am in this world, I shouldn't want to retire. Why? Because if I don't need to work for myself, then I can work in order to help and in order to serve others. We read in our du'as that, "O Allah, la tastabdil bi ghayri." "O Allah, don't substitute somebody else for me in serving your path." As long as we are able, my ideal is not, I want to be rich enough that I don't have to work again. My ideal is that, "Oh Allah, give me the strength so that until my last day in this world, I am working and I am serving your path." Now, whether it means that I'm working so I can pay my mortgage, or whether it means that I am working so that I can contribute, or I can volunteer my time, or I can teach, or I can serve in some other capacity. The goal is not to end, but to continue to work. And work not to get richer, because there are some people who never retire, and the reason they never retire is because they want control, and they want to just accumulate more. أَلْهَاكُمُ التَّكَاثُرُ حَتَّى زُرْتُمُ الْمَقَابِرَ. They just have takathur, they want more and more. That's not what we're talking about. But rather, you want to continue to serve because i'malu qalila means as long as you are in this world. And tana'amu kathira means not that you should have a period of just relaxation in this world, but rather that you want to have that life of the company of believers and the company of the prophets, and most importantly, the company of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhimu salatu wassalam in the hereafter. And in order to be able to have this goal, that requires us to put our relaxation and our enjoyment and our time to recharge throughout our life. So a believer doesn't say, let me work very hard and cram, and then I'm going to have a vacation where I forget work and I just think about enjoyment. Whether it be during the year or whether it be at the end of my work life, retire early and then I spend time traveling and enjoying. Whatever the case might be, a believer has a different philosophy. I never want to retire. I never want to stop working. But that doesn't mean that I don't have time for enjoyment, as beautifully represented in a hadith of Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam. He says, divide your time every day into at least 3 different places, 3 different stages. Doesn't have to be equal, And it doesn't have to be only these 3 things that you budget in your day, but do them every day. Sa'a yunaji fiha rabbah. There should be a time when you speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your salat, your dua, your munajat. Talk to Allah. Remember Allah. وَسَاعَ يَرُمُّ فِيهَا مَعَاشًا. There should be a time when you're taking care of your worldly affairs. Whether you're studying, whether you're working, you take care of your worldly affairs. وَسَاعَ يُخَلِّ بَيْنَ نَفْسِهِ وَلَذَّتِهَا فِيمَا يَحِلُّ وَيَجْمُلُ. And then you should have a time for enjoyment. Do things that you like. It shouldn't take over your day, it should be sa'a. But that day when you are on vacation, you should still give some time to marammatul ma'ash, thinking about your worldly affairs. And you should still give some time to munajatul Rabb, talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no day that is all play, and there is no day that is no recreation. This is the ideal of a believer, that I live a balanced life every day. I have some time for worship, some time for my worldly needs, some time for my enjoyment, and I want to keep this until the end of my life. My ideal is not to be rich and retire and just have fun. But so long as Allah gives me strength and ability to find a way to work, to serve His path. May Allah grant us that tawfiq, and may that be our dua and our aim as we begin the new year in 2022. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna Allah ya'muru bil-adli wal-ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal-munkari wal-baghi ya'idhukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salatul Jumu'ah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Aliyan waliyullah. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم مثل الذين حملوا التوراة ثم لم يحملوها كمثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا بئس مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآيات الله والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين قل يا أيها الذين هادوا إن زعمتم أنكم أولياء لله من دون الناس فتمنوا الموت إن كنتم صادقين ولا يتمنونه أبدا بما قدمت أيديهم والله عليم بالظالمين قل إن الموت الذي تفرون منه فإنه ملاقيكم ثم تردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائما قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربنا. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا اغفر لنا وارحمنا وعافنا واعف عنا في الدنيا والآخرة إنك على كل شيء قدير. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
تسبيح فاطمة الزهراء.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا ذا النعماء والجود يا ذا المن والطول حرم شيبتي على النار اللهم اهدني من عندك واحفظ علي من فضلك وانشر علي من رحمتك وانزل علي من بركاتك إلهي هذه صلاتي صليتها لا لحاجة منك عليها ولا رغبة منك فيها إلا تعظيما وطاعة وإجابة لك إلى ما أمرتني به إلهي إن كان فيها خلل أو نقص من نيتها أو قيامها أو قراءتها أو ركوعها أو سجودها فلا تواخذني وتفضل علي بالقبول والغفران برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم صل على محمد.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم إن مغفرتك أرجى من عملي وإن رحمتك أوسع من ذنبي اللهم إن كان ذنبي عندك عظيما فعفوك أعظم من ذنبي اللهم إن لم أكن أهلا نبلغ رحمتك فرحمتك أهل أن تبلغني وتسعني لأنها وسعت كل شيء برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام على علي أمير المؤمنين السلام على فاطمة الزهراء السلام على الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة السلام على علي زين العابدين السلام على محمد بن علي باقر علم النبيين السلام على جعفر بن محمد الصادق السلام على موسى بن جعفر الكاظم السلام على علي بن موسى الرضا السلام على محمد بن علي الجواد السلام على علي بن محمد الهادي السلام على الحسن بن علي الزكي العسكري السلام على الحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين